entirely happy. And some of your unhappiness is an outgrowth of dealing with other people. I believe this is true for two reasons. One is that I travel a lot. Like, I make a living going into different shops and talking to people for brief periods of time, and I see all over lots of variants of unhappiness. But also, I believe this is true because there's a study about it on this very issue. They describe it as being about the distribution and causes of programmer unhappiness. It's actually very recent. It published in some journal whose name is too long to pronounce just this summer. And so here's what they did. They went on GitHub and they harvested almost 500,000 email addresses. And of those, they randomly selected 33,000. They sent rounds of surveys out to these people, so eventually they had 1,300 and some respondents. They used those surveys to isolate 219 different kinds of unhappiness, ways to be unhappy. They asked people if they were unhappy in that way, and they got 2,280 references to those, which is about 10 references per code. Programmers are not perfectly happy. Now, of course, that average is not right. The unhappiness is skewed, and here are the top 10. This is just my slide font, whatever. Just ignore that. And so this represents the top 10 represent 817 out of those 2280. And just take a minute to look at them. Being stuck in problem solving. I was actually surprised by that because I sort of like that feeling, but clearly it is not universal. Time pressure, yep. Bad code quality, yeah, we hate that. Underperforming colleagues. It made me wonder if the underperforming colleagues were rating the person who rated them as underperforming also as underperforming. Like, is this mutual? Feelings of inadequacy, boring things, unexplained broken code. Yeah, we hate that. Bad decision making. It didn't really get down to who was it my decisions that were bad or was somebody else inflicting bad decisions on me? That was not entirely clear. Imposed limitations and then personal issues that are unrelated to work. Now, while I agree that they categorize them as internal and external, and it's true that the internal things are clearly matter, but for the purpose of today's talk, I'm just going to ignore them, right? Those go away. And I'm suspicious of this one. I mean, boring kind of feels to me like it's in the eye of the receiver, so for today's talk, I'm going to throw that out too. And we're left with these. 6 separate items, and I think they're all caused by the same underlying problem, and it's other people. They can be so annoying. All the problems that were the problems that were listed here, like you're here at this conference, right? You're one of those people. You probably have ideas about how to avoid all those things, but other people keep misbehaving in ways that cause pain to roll downhill to you. If only they would behave the way you want them to behave, everything would be better. Now, if you're right, but you can't get them to agree, clearly you are insufficiently persuasive. This is a persuasion problem. And so now is the time for me to admit that I have a degree in psychology and that this is something from which you never recover. It's totally shaped the way I think about the world. When I see people being unhappy because they have disagreements, because they can't come to agreements, I see failures of persuasion. And it turns out that humans are hardwired to be persuadable. We are amazingly persuadable. Early humans were weak and feeble, and they lived in a world that was cold and dark, and groups that could collaborate survived to reproduce. This is evolution at work. We are hardwired. Evolution selected for persuadability and collaboration in humans. And so there are many different, we are persuadable and hardwired to be collaborative in many, many ways. There's a ton of research about this, and I'm going to give you one perspective. It's famous. This is a famous book. This guy's famous. His name is Cialdini. He wrote a book called The Psychology of Persuasion, Influence. It's sold 3 million copies. It's been translated into 30 different languages. And in this book, he talks about all kinds of research about how to persuade people, and he ends up grouping the ideas, the concepts into six actual rules. And I'm going to go over those 6 rules. So the first one is this idea of reciprocity. This means that if I give you something or help you in any way, that you're obligated to return the favor. And it also states that you're obligated to accept a favor that I try to do you. Now, this is such a powerful rule that we have a whole set of language around people who violate it, right? Moocher, ingrate. Like none of us want to be that person. It's evolutionarily adaptive because for the first time you could give something away and not lose it. I could give you food or fire or safety without having it disappear from me. I would be guaranteed to get it back by this rule of reciprocity. So it's a way to satisfy someone else with a future obligation. Super useful for survival. It's so strong that it can easily be used against you. For example, some of you may be old enough to remember this. Does anybody know who these guys are? They're Hare Krishnas. Yeah, they're giving away flowers and asking for donations. Now, before they stumbled upon the giveaway flower, ask for donation ideas, they skipped the first part. They would just ask for donations. And it didn't work very well. And then they realized that if they incurred an obligation in you by giving you something, that it would be really hard, it was super uncomfortable to not give a donation when they asked for it. It worked so well that I traveled in airports when it used to be that Krishnas were full of airports. They solicited funds in every airport in the United States. And you could see they'd be out in the main lobby, and all the passengers that were going by, all the travelers would be trying to avoid making eye contact. You're trying to seek by, because you have an obligation to take that flower when they offer it. And then once you take it, you feel that obligation to give them money. So nobody wants to make eye contact with the Krishnas, right? In addition, it's clear that they knew they were violating the reciprocity rule because as soon as if you got caught and took a flower and gave them a donation, the first thing you would do when you rounded the corner was throw it away. And they had there would be a Krishna person assigned to go around to all the trash cans and get the flowers back so they could recycle them on the next victims. We're annoyed. We feel an annoyance by the violation of the bargain that we have, so much so that the Port City Authority of New York City sued them. And in 1992, there was a landmark case in the Supreme Court that said airports could ban people from soliciting funds. The reason that they're not around anymore is because we took them to court and this whole operation got banned. And I suspect it was because of this violation of the reciprocity rule. That's what makes us mad. Okay, so the next rule number 2, is about consistency. We have a strong built-in desire to act in our own self-image. This means that the more public a commitment you make, and the more investment that you make in that commitment, the more likely it is that you will do that thing. This leads to some surprising effects. For example, if you ask someone who just bet on a horse, if you ask them before they place the bet and after they place the bet, how likely it is they think their horse will win, they're much more confident about their horse winning after the bet is placed. Like minutes later, nothing has changed, except they made a public commitment to a certain outcome. You also may be, it turns out if you can just describe somebody some way. There's a bunch of research where they tell people, well, you're a civic-minded kind of person. Maybe you will do this thing. And it turns out the rate of response, the rate of people doing that thing goes up. This gets used against us. Some of you may be parents. You know that phenomenon where there's some incredibly wanted toy, the famous toy, the toy of the season. So it's all over the ads. And then your kid begs you for it for Christmas, and you say, yep, you bet, I'll get that for you. And then you go to the store, and they're always out. And then somehow, mysteriously, after Christmas, those ads reappear, and now there's a stock of those toys. Well, this happened because toy companies realized they have this very episodic sales cycle where they make most of their money at Christmas, and they're trying to spread it out. And what they realized, they tried a bunch of things, right? They tried advertising, all the normal marketing stuff. And what they realized was that if they could get you to commit to your child to buying them a toy, when they ask you for it, all they had to do was advertise it again in January. And the kids would say, Mom, the toy's there. Dad, I can get me the toy. And then you would say, I spent all your Christmas. You got everything you're going to get for Christmas. And the kid would say, you promised. Right? The toy companies, marketing people are using this rule against you. The next rule is one of social proof. This says that if I'm uncertain about what to do, I'll take my cue from others. The more uncertain I am, the more likely I am to attend to another cue. I use this rule a lot myself. I'm a cyclist, and I had second thoughts about telling you this story, but I'm going to tell you. I'm a cyclist, and it's common to go on a long ride where you, let's say, do not have access to facilities. And so you end up in the woods beside the road. If you're with a group of cyclists and they're all standing by the road near you, the first thing that happens when you get in this situation is on the loneliest rural road in North Carolina, a car will drive by. And that car, if there's a group of people standing there, all the people, and it'll be full of people, all the people in that car will turn and look in the direction of the cyclist standing by the road, right? And it's really easy. We learned early on that I could make all those people look in the other direction, and it is just you get all your friends who are standing by the road to stare fixedly off in the opposite distance. That's all you have to do. If they'll all just look in another direction, you can watch the heads. As the car drives by, you can watch all the heads turn. They're trying to figure out what they're doing. Social proof. We spend a lot of, we have insufficient information, so we look a lot to the behavior of other people to decide what to do. Rule number 4 is about authority. We defer to people who have authority. When a person, there's two kinds of authority, really. There's command authority. Often, command authority is denoted by some kind of uniform. This is teachers, judges, police. This is the obey me kind of authority. And then there's experts, who's really have a sort of believe me kind of authority. We, in software development, we use a lot of expert authority. I distinctly remember when I learned TDD. I was a pretty good programmer that day before I started trying to do test-first development, and my productivity plummeted nearly to 0 the day after. It was a painful process, and it did not make me a better programmer, not right away. It took a long time and some real perseverance to get good at it, to make it pay off, but I tried, I persisted, because I believed in the experts. People that I just thought of as smarter than me were telling me to do it, and it felt like if I just tried long enough, maybe it would be worthwhile. The 5th one is super interesting to me. There's a whole category of liking. If you like people, you're more likely to do what they want. Now, I find this interesting because it's so bleeding obvious, right? Duh. But we don't really spend much time thinking about how powerful liking is. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can use this to get people to behave in certain ways. We're more likely to like people who like us back. You can actually use, there's a psychological thing called the Ben Franklin effect, which says if you get someone to do you a favor, they will like you more. Now, you can't go overboard, right? It goes back to the consistency principle that we've already talked about, right? There's apparently this mental phenomenon that says, well, I did them a favor, I must like them, right? I know. So, and this is why it feels so weird when people that you don't know very well are too nice. You know how creepy that feels? It's like, I didn't know we were this good of friends. And it's because liking is a bond of trust that implies reciprocal obligation. Like, tied up in liking is the fact that I will do favors for you. We're super suspicious of people who abuse this principle and seem too friendly for no good reason. The final Cialdini rule is scarcity. So this basically says that if you think it's scarce, you'll want it more. This is why sales end at midnight tonight, and why Amazon tells you there's only 7 of those left, right? And it turns out that it is not your imagination that when you're waiting for that parking space that someone is leaving, that they take especially long. There's research about this, right? People who are in those parking places know people are waiting, and they report that they are leaving more quickly, but if you time them, they are actually going more slowly. And the explanation for this is that, and also there's another phenomenon here. If you blow your horn at them, it makes it worse. They wait longer. It takes even longer if you blow your horn. And it's because the more urgently you express your desire to get in that parking place, the more value it has to them, the more scarce it seems. And so that's this whole book in action, all this stuff. Now, I have to tell you, I really hated this book. It's all famous. I totally hated it. I thought I would be, I have a psychology degree, so I thought it would be super interesting. And it was kind of, but really, in the very first chapter, he describes all these things as weapons of influence. And let me read you some quotes. The strength of these things is the nearly mechanical process by which the power within these weapons can be activated, and the consequent exploitability of this power by anyone who knows how to trigger them. He also says the great advantage is that not only do they work, but also they are virtually undetectable. They're hardwired. You get the right stimulus, you get the right response. If you're aware of these rules, you can use them to your advantage, or at least possibly defend against having them be used against you. If you're not aware of these rules, I recommend that you take a friend next time you go buy a car, because they're doing it. So this book really is about sales. And even though the science in it is fun, I didn't like it. Made me grumpy. Now, there's another perspective on persuasion, one that some of you may be aware of. It's written by this guy. I know, there's a reason he's in black and white, because it's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The whole premise of this book is I can change others by changing myself. Now, as soon as I heard that, I liked this book better already. It seemed much more interesting. He groups winning friends and influencing people into the ways to do it in 4 different categories, and I'm just going to play them. The first category is how to make people like you. Remember that science says liking is one of the things that's related to persuadability. There's 6 things in this category. Okay, those seem good. People love their names. We should listen. We should take an interest in them. We should make them feel important. And there's a lot of this in here. Sincerity, respect for other people. So his next category is about how to handle people. There's only 3 things in this category. As I was reading this book, I started wondering if I was a good enough person. Next, he talks about winning people over to your way of thinking. This has 12 in it, so this is a little bit long. Don't have an argument. Have respect for their opinions. Admit it if you're wrong. You can see how these things sort of tie back to the scientific principles, even though these are written from someone's experience. It's like, no, I want it to be my idea. Imagine if you worked at a place where this was all true, where your coworkers and your bosses tried to talk you into doing things by doing these things. All right, and finally, there's be a leader. Cause for a little soul searching, huh? Like things would be better if we all did this. When I was working on this talk, I talked to this woman, Sarah May. I don't know, some of you may know her. She's busy in the Ruby community. I talked to her, I told her I was going to read this book, and she said, oh, I read it. I can give you the 1-line synopsis. And I was like, okay, the 1-line book with the cliff notes? You bet, tell me. And she said this. Oh, okay, you eventually find them to be. All right, sorry, font problem with someone. All right, act as if others are interesting, and she said, act as if others are interesting, and you will eventually find them so. And really, the whole book, this is what the book is about. It's not about them, it's about you. And that's Carnegie. And so now we're back to persuasion, right? You're unhappy, I think, sometimes. And so now we're trying to decide whether or not we get to have our way. And I know that it seems like if you know enough about persuasion, like you could use this research to talk people into behaving the way you want them to behave. There's no doubt. People sell us stuff every day based on these principles. They are, as Cialdini says, they weaponize them. However, when I look at these things, I know we have the science, and we could use sort of stealthy military tactics to persuade people, or even, I mean, we could do even better, right? We could try to behave like Carnegie suggests that we behave, but all of this desire to persuade other people really depends on one critical factor being true. It assumes that you're right. and that if they did what you wanted, the world would be a better place. And now I think it's time to cast a cold, hard light of day on that assumption. It might be the case that things would be better off if you got persuaded. Maybe it's you and not them. Maybe you're wrong about TDD or making a bunch of small objects or what style guide is best or whether or not to do what Code Climate says. Right? Maybe if they do those things for you, life will get worse. And it would be really nice if we could persuade. If we're right, it would be nice if we could persuade people with facts. But it turns out facts are scarce on the ground in programming. Like much of what we do involves opinions about how to write codes. It's very, like if we knew what was right, I believe we would just do it. But very often we don't know what's right. And we end up in these situations where we have long arguments with other people, and those arguments are mostly differences of opinion about means. And it turns out, in most cases, we share, there's a great deal of overlap about the ends that we desire. I mean, it's true that the problem might be that they're actually evil and are trying to destroy all your software, but that's probably not true. They probably hold the same lofty, honorable goals as you, and they've simply chosen a different means to achieve that common goal. We may be far more alike than we are different, but you never know it by looking at those causes of unhappiness. And the reason I feel like I know that they share your goals is I understand what motivates them. And if you understood their motivations, you'd be better equipped to forge collaborations. So why do we do the things we do? In 2010, a guy named Daniel Pink published this book, Drive. It's about a bunch of research they did at MIT. They had people do tasks, memorizing strings of digits, throwing balls through hoops, do word puzzles, spatial stuff, all kinds of things, and they paid them for doing them well. So you would earn a little bit of money if you did a terrible job. You would earn kind of a middle amount of money if you did an okay job, and you would earn the most money if you did a really good job. Kind of like work's supposed to be, right? They pay you for your work. And it turned out that as long as the tasks only involve mechanical skills, that bonuses work just like you'd expect. Higher pay, better performance. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, it turns out that larger rewards lead to poorer performance. And this research has been replicated all over. Like, this is not one of those social science things that is going to be different next time someone does a study. It's well documented that this is true. So for tasks that require conceptual creative thinking, money doesn't work as a motivator. Now, certainly money is a motivator of some kind, but here's what it turns out. You just need enough. Like if people get paid enough so that the money issue gets taken off the table, then other things matter more about getting them to, motivating them to perform at work. And Pink found out, he discovered 3 things that he talked about that are at the root, at the core of our motivation. The first one is autonomy. We want to be self-directed. We do not want to be micromanaged and have people telling us what to do. We want to choose our fate. The second one is mastery. We want to get better at stuff. We have a deep, deep drive to become more proficient at the tasks that we're doing. The final one, the third one, is purpose. We want our work to have meaning. And if you look at these 3 things, they explain open source software. So many of you have day jobs, and then you do other things at night, and it's because you want this, you need this, and you're seeking it at other places in your life. So it's not about carrots and sticks. The science of motivation says that getting to be self-directed, being able to get better at stuff, and making a contribution is what matters to you. And so if we agree that other people's motivations are these, that their motivations are as honorable as ours, then we should commit to understanding why our means are different. And maybe instead of getting them to do things our way, we need to find a way to collaborate. We need to figure out how to be both influenced and be influenced. And that leads me to teamwork. There are a lot of studies out there that show groups innovate faster and see mistakes more quickly. People working in teams achieve better results and report higher job satisfaction. They do better and they like it more when they're on good teams. But teams, of course, involve other people. And we've already decided that other people are the source of most of our unhappiness. And so perhaps instead of talking about how to persuade people, the question we should be asking is, how can we make better teams? Google asked that. They care, they have a lot of teams, and they're good at data, and they thought they could figure it out. And in 2012, they embarked on a huge project that they named Aristotle. And it was to study hundreds of teams at Google and figure out what makes good teams, what qualities good teams have. They started out by looking at all the research, half a century's of research about teams, and then they looked at the composition of the groups inside Google. They looked at things like, did the people on the team socialize outside the office, or did they have hobbies, or like how were they similar, how were they different? Were they all extroverts, were they all introverts, or did they have the same educational background? They looked at the data 9 ways from Sandi and drew a bunch of pictures because they're Google, but they couldn't find any patterns. With their best efforts, they couldn't figure out, they couldn't come up with any evidence that the composition of a team had any relationship to whether a team was effective or not. Personality types didn't matter, skills, backgrounds didn't matter, nothing that they looked at. Basically what they said, the quote from the paper I read said, it seemed like the people didn't matter. The who that was on the team did not matter. And as they were trying to figure out, I mean, they knew that there was a difference, and if they could find the difference, they could make good teams. They came across some research into a thing called group norms. So norms are traditions, right? There's a lot of conversation about norms in the US right now, norms being broken. They're unwritten rules about how we behave. Team members, it's interesting that when you're on a team, your proclivity as an individual is overridden by the norm of the team. Turns out that people who are late all the time, if they're on a team where the norm of the team is to meet on time, those people come on time. Like the team norms trump individual behavior. And so Google's research, once they started looking at norms, they found dozens that seemed important, but then they would find that sometimes they knew which teams were high-performing, and sometimes high-performing teams had completely different norms. And so they were still trying to figure out what mattered. And at that point, they stumbled onto this idea. There were some researchers at Carnegie Mellon and MIT back in 2010 that published a big paper where they were trying to figure out if people have intelligence, maybe groups do too. Maybe there's a collective IQ that emerges on a team that's distinct from any individual member. And when the Google folks started looking at this, they finally decided that that was it, that what distinguished good teams from dysfunctional groups was this norm. It's about how team members treat each other. So when they looked into exactly the specifics of that, they found two things. That on these teams, on the good teams, where they treated each other well, they shared these two qualities in common. First, members of the team, people of the team spoke roughly in the same proportion, which of course, because they're psychologists, they called equality and distribution of conversational turn-taking. So, and all this means is that it wasn't in every meeting. It wasn't like every meeting had everybody talk the same amount. It was over the course of a day, the members of the team spoke about the same amount over time. Right? That was an important factor. The next quality that mattered was a thing they called average social sensitivity. And this is a fancy way of saying that the members of the team were skilled at, they had enough intuition to figure out from other people's body language or facial expressions how they felt. They could read nonverbal cues. And so these two things, this conversational turn-taking and social sensitivity, are aspects of something that psychology calls psychological safety. It's defined as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's that sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. They talk a lot about mutual respect. They use those words all the time on the teams. And so other norms are important, like teams need to have a culture of dependability, and they need to know who's going to do what. But it turns out this thing, the most critical piece, the thing that you need to know in order to, a thing that teams need to have in order to be successful, is they have to be psychologically safe. And so psychological safety starts with you. You set the tone of every conversation you're in. And in these conversations, words matter. Words about the past are often about blame. Words about the future are about corrective action, about improving what comes next. In the face of conflict, uncertainty, and confusion, you should have strong opinions, for sure, but they should be weakly held. You need an identity, but it should be small. You shouldn't be committed. You shouldn't be constrained by your history. If you think back on Carnegie's suggestions about how to win friends and influence people, all those things are open-handed and forward-looking. And they're scary to me because it takes a lot of confidence to behave that way in all situations. What prevents us from sincerely trying to make them like us or win them over or be a leader? Why do we fail to trust their intentions, believe in their motivations, to build a psychologically safe space? Consider this. If you were having a heated discussion and someone accused you of being purple, you would just look at them and say, okay, tell me more about that. Right? You wouldn't have a strong reaction to that because you are not secretly afraid that you're purple. You are not your code. You are not your past. You are not your parents, and you are not responsible for everything. If you pop the why can't we come to an agreement stack all the way down, you come to fear. I know this because I'm afraid, and I'm very confident that you are too. But I also know something else. It doesn't really matter because it's a human condition, right? Despite it, alongside it, within it, you are all good enough. And your past does not dictate your future. You can change the future by changing yourself. Persuasion is a skill that you can learn, but with great power comes great responsibility. If you want to achieve your purpose, you have to concentrate on persuading your team to be psychologically safe. A good team will always have better ideas than any individual, and to build the best team, you must be your best self. Thank you. And thank Tim. Oh, wait, I have more slides. References, I wrote that book. I wrote this book. And that's me, and I have that sticker if you want one. Come see me if you want a sticker. All right, thank you all.